You're listening to the Minor Detail Podcast, a place where all things community, encouragement, and lifestyle come together through meaningful conversation. I'm your host, Khaila Ariel, and I'm so grateful that you chose to join me on this journey of authenticity to serve as a link that amplifies human connection in our everyday lives. Navigating life on a daily basis can be difficult, but I am confident that together we'll be our own answer to life's minor little details that come our way. Sit back and enjoy today's episode, purposely curated just for you. Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of the Minor Detail Podcast. I'm your host, Khaila Ariel, and I am so grateful that you are tuning into today's episode. Guys, I cannot believe that I'm saying this, but today is the season finale of season 1. This is the last episode of season 1. And it's crazy to think that we've made it to this point, but I am feeling so freaking fulfilled, okay? I said this in episode 1, but I had set out to create the Minor Detail Podcast over a year ago. And the fact that it has finally come to fruition is just so fulfilling. I also say this all the time to myself, but I'll say it here. There is nothing better than following through with what you said you do, okay? I'm gonna repeat it. There is nothing better than following through with what you said you'd do. I'm gonna be honest, y'all, it has not been the easiest road up until this point in my life, but I have proven time and time and time again that when you just decide to make better decisions, or you decide to set a goal, or you just decide to be the best version of you, it's just nothing better. There's seriously nothing better. And so with that being said, today's episode being the finale, I just really wanted to chat about what taking control of your life and tapping into the best version of you truly means, okay? I think this topic of conversation is really timely because I oftentimes find myself either having it with friends or having it with Cam. B, I'm in the point where, you're transitioning from early 20s to late 20s and you're starting to truly have an understanding, or you've had the understanding that you want more out of life, or there are things that aren't necessarily making you the happiest, or, just feelings of stuckness. And I think I had that moment a couple years ago, especially around the pandemic when I was working a previous role where I just knew I wasn't being fulfilled. And I talked about this in episode 1. I quit during the pandemic and took 10 months just to find a better role that was suited for what I knew my skill set and value was bringing to the table. And this is not to say that this conversation is specific to, professional life and career, because I think that it can span across multiple instances within your life, whether it be relationships or personal to who you are as an individual, or like I said, professional career. There just comes a time where either A, you're wanting more, or B, you're just feeling like lackluster. And I think a lot of times what happens is we have the tendency to allow life to happen to us versus allowing life to happen for us. And essentially this means our approach is just very reactive, right? If something happens, we respond immediately, or maybe we even don't. Whereas when life is happening for us, we take a more proactive approach where we've already anticipated how a scenario may unfold. And we've also decided how we want to respond in advance. And so having that realization was almost I was mind blown, or it felt like enlightenment, because you don't realize days are just passing by and you're just kind of going through the motions until you realize, and you're like, wait a minute, something's not right. And I also think I had this moment specifically. I was in college and I was nearing my senior year. I'll never forget. Actually, I was in my senior year, which is kind of sad, but I was ending my senior year of college and going into my final semester. And I realized I did not have a real plan for what I wanted my life to look like next. And this is not to say I hadn't had internships and I hadn't study things in school and got a feel for what I wanted, but I just truly did not know. I think I had spent most of my life having things decided for me, or just passively letting things happen. And so coming out of college, I'll never forget, there was that last semester I was like, girl, you need to figure out what's about to happen next. And I think that was the decision I made to move to LA. So I've always had these moments where I realized okay, it's time to shift gears. This is no longer working, or this is no longer serving you. And, you have decisions to make. And so they're very specific moments in my life where I can identify I had that time to myself and deciding like, all right, we got to figure out what's about to happen next. And so that's that difference between like a reactive versus proactive approach where you're kind of, like I said, standing by the wayside, just letting life happen to you versus actually like having an understanding of next steps. And I will also be honest, like disclaimer up front, I don't believe that we ever fully gain control over everything that happens in our lives, but I do believe that we can help steer things in the right direction. I think it would be a bit naive for me to say we truly have control. Like we know exactly how our lives are going to play out. We know exactly, what the future is going to look like. I know how many kids I'm going to have. I know what job I'm going to have. I know, yada, yada, yada. Because I also think that is a little bit, I said naive earlier, but I also would say it can be a detriment, right? Like when you have your entire life planned out or you think that you know exactly how things are going to go when they don't, it hurts. Like it sucks and you feel like you've just fallen on the ground face down and it's almost like the cover was pulled from underneath you is how I describe it, because I've also been there where I thought, my life would pan out a certain way and it truly didn't. And when I had to make hard decisions, they were hard, but for a reason that was later revealed to me in more, taking the shape of reward. But that's also why I like to say steer things in the right direction versus gaining control. But for like vanity, the title of this episode will definitely say gaining control over your life because, we like to do the dramatics over here. Anywho, I think a question that I asked myself early on to help identify what taking control would truly feel like was, and this was me asking me, what habits are you holding on to that no longer serve your personal growth in your current season of life? And I think that was a very interesting but awesome question to ask myself, because it really does take self-awareness and self-honesty to realize like, girl, what's not working? Or like, what are you holding on to and forcing that no longer fits? And that was a really difficult question to ask, because I think if you are a person that is self-aware, immediately following that question, you have the answers. You know that relationship is not working. That job is no longer serving you, or that job is no longer serving you. And these are the sacrifices that you have to make to like get yourself in a better position. And so one thing that I will say is like asking that question, it requires immediate action. And that action needs to be followed up by you, which is not always fun. And I also think it was a powerful question because I didn't look at gaining control as a hard thing to accomplish. I looked at it as freedom. And when I really think about what I want in life, I find myself identifying freedom as my biggest goal. Financial freedom, freedom of time to do more of what I love, the freedom to just build my life. And when it really boils down, it all ladders back up to whoever is steering the ship, me or life. I had recently started doing life coaching, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned this already, but I had started doing life coaching, which I love because I had been in years of therapy previous to that. And I felt like I needed something a little bit different because, again, I was like feeling stuck and just a little like lackluster, but not directly tied to my emotions. It was just more so like the feeling of unmotivatedness that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And in life coaching is where I discovered because, they ask like, what are your goals? And I discovered that one of my biggest goals was freedom. And when I said it, it just shocked me because I was like, I didn't even know that. But also, it just felt right to say and to identify. And I think freedom is so important is because it's like I understand where I thrive and I understand like what I need in order for me to thrive and just become the best version of myself. And so when I ask that question, like what habits are you holding on to that no longer serve your personal growth, it'll look different for you than it looks for me. It looks different for everyone. And so being able to identify and understand like what you truly need to get to that point to become the best version, it's just really important. And it does take some level of, self accountability, like I said before, self-awareness. But it's also great that you're even taking that step and asking that question and coming up with answers, And so I just want to share a little bit of what has worked for me, a little bit of what I constantly strive for daily, or, like what I genuinely do implement. And at each level, it stays consistent, because I think the things that are consistent and never change, and I shouldn't say never, but, don't change, are the things that really like anchor you down and get you to that point. So the first of which I will mention is discipline. Okay. And I think we all have a love-hate relationship with that phrase, because I know I did, but discipline is your best friend. And you might ask yourself, like, what does discipline truly mean in my life? Right. And it's so funny, because I also may have said this previously. I don't remember. I got to do better with tracking that. But this year for me, when I was thinking about, because every year I kind of give myself a theme of the year or a word of the year. I kind of got that practice from, I feel like I had talked to people or friends and they were doing it. Anywho, I started to give my years for like the last 3 years. I started to give my life, or I'm sorry, the theme of my year, like a word that could describe it. And so it's funny that this year's theme is discipline. And it was coming into 2022 that I knew I would have to make major changes that would need to occur in order for me to get to like the next level, or just like next level of breakthrough in what I wanted to do. And it's not to say like these things are lacking necessarily, but it was something that I knew I needed to anchor down on in order for me to see success. And it sucks, because when you talk about discipline, I think the immediate feeling is just like uncomfortableness. Like, it's just not fun. It's just not the first thing you want to do, right? It's waking up earlier or doing this other thing that just like you're doing over and over and over, and so consistently that it becomes second nature. But in the beginning, it's just tough. And I remember early on, like for the longest, discipline felt like this huge sacrifice. Earlier in my 20s, I remember talking to my therapist and telling her that I was so frustrated because it felt like I was doing all of the sacrificing and not seeing the fruits of my labor. Okay, y'all, I've been dramatic. All right, even like talking about that or repeating that is like, girl, get a grip. But truly, like I remember I was like at my wit's end. This was back when like therapy was in person. I'm sure it might be back in person, but before COVID and like we were normal. I was just like frustrated, and I like probably threw my hands in the air and like slammed them down. I want y'all to picture this moment. And I was like, look, it sucks. Okay. I'm starting to pay more bills. I'm starting to like show up to work and do this day in and day out. And it's just like a eat, sleep, repeat. I can't remember what else was like really getting at me, but I remember it was like I was paying more bills and I was just like going to work 9 to 5, coming home, going to sleep, doing it over. And it was just like, if this is discipline, like I don't want it. And I was just frustrated and tired of it, and I wanted like an immediate change. So yes, I too am guilty of making small changes and expecting instantaneous results. Okay. But what I didn't realize was that with discipline comes great sacrifice and a sense of feeling uncomfortable. And so now in my life, when I sense uncomfortableness, I kind of lean into that a bit more, because I realize, or I find that it's the best way for me personally to identify growth. Is like, okay, this kind of sucks right now, but I know in, 10 weeks, it'll become easier. Or it'll become something that I'm doing without even thinking. And I know that it will serve me best in the future. For example, I wouldn't say earlier this year, but like a few months ago, I was truly genuinely feeling like I could not balance everything on my plate. I was feeling stuck. I was feeling unmotivated and just like overall just over it. I was working my 9 to 5 work. I was doing my nonprofit work on the side, and then just trying to build as a content creator. And I also probably was trying to get this podcast off the ground, if I'm being honest. And it just came a time where I'm like, something either has to go or like something is not working. But I didn't genuinely feel like something, needed to be taken off my plate, because again, I typically can sense when it's time to like transition and take a step in a different direction. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Precious, who's been on the podcast, and she was basically talking to me about like, what are some areas in my life where I can change up my routines or change up what I'm doing and just do it a little differently. And so ever since then, because she suggested, she was like, listen, you might need, like, we can't make more time, but there may be a way for you to get more hours in the day, right? And so she suggested waking up at 5 a.m. and I thought she was crazy. But I've been doing that for the past like 3 to 4 months consistently, and it has made a major change. And it's not 5 a.m. to start my work earlier. It's not 5 a.m. to, wake up and be anxious and get all my thoughts out. It's like 5 a.m. to have quiet time and prayer and just like breathe and check my calendar for the day or for the week and get an understanding of how I'm stepping into the day again, so that my day is not controlling me and I'm not reacting to everything, but I'm actually getting ahead of it and I'm being proactive. It's time to really just have time for me before like the world wakes up and starts attacking me with questions and needing responses at work. It's time to like just have mental stillness before going to work out, because that's usually what I do to follow. And so that's just an example of like what discipline in my life looks like. And although it can appear to be difficult in the beginning, it's just so worth it, because I'm also a person, and if you're similar, that needs to be grounded. It's like, all right, how do I identify moments throughout my day-to-day life that keep me grounded, that make me feel grounded? Who am I in, relationship with? Who are my friends? What kind of content am I consuming? Whether that be like social media or television, how much time am I getting alone to be still? Like those things are really important. And being strategic about them is really important. We talked about this in last week's episode with Whitney. Like, what are boundaries or processes that you could be creating for yourself for you to just like succeed and excel? And they could literally be the smallest of things. Like it could be something so small, but it allows you time to just like think freely, to, read a passage of a book, or just like be in a better temperament. Like sometimes, this randomly just came to me, but sometimes like waking up at 5 a.m. and waking up at 8 a.m. make the difference of how I respond to like my coworkers in an email chain, or like on Teams chat. It sounds like small and minor, but it really is a major thing. And it's because I've created elements of discipline that I literally need to function and operate, as dramatic as that sounds. And so it's funny to just like reflect at the top of the year and think about the specific things that I wanted to be more disciplined about, and to know that I'm still implementing those things. So it's also just awesome and nice to reflect on personally. But for me, discipline is just starting with something small, the smallest habit, the smallest goal that you might have, and slowly chipping away at that. And by chipping away at it, I mean like constantly redoing it, just so that you're getting into the process of it being second nature. Or if there's a goal, constantly chipping away at it by attacking, a subtask or task attached to it, so that you're one step closer. Because I think in the beginning for me, discipline was just very blanket and it was a very vague term, but really just going after it and leaning into that was seriously the most helpful thing that I could have ever done. And I know I say this all the time, but a super, super, super major cheat code. Okay. So I would definitely categorize discipline as one of the most game-changing characteristics that I have established within my own life. A second one would be, and this is very, very interesting to incorporate and include, but a second one for me would be saying no. Like taking control of your life, learning what is no longer serving your personal growth in like just the current season that you're in. Saying no is major, okay? This is typically like an elephant in the room, but at the end of the day, you got to realize like you can't do everything and you have to say no. I'm at a phase where, and it's so funny because this has definitely happened previously in my life, where I felt like, okay, in this season, I got to say no because I can't do everything. And there was a time where I didn't necessarily have to live like that, but I'm actually in a current season where that is the case. And I wouldn't say like I have to say no completely to each and everything, but I do have to be strategic about the things that I do say yes to, if that makes sense. Like if I know I have a certain schedule that I like to abide by during the week, then I have to stick to that. So it's like first comes the discipline, and then anything that is not feeding your discipline, so laddering back up to that discipline is like, all right, what do I say no to? What can I say yes to? So that's typically like what I have to do right now. And I think it's just more so, again, to create like habits and a schedule that works for me and really just seeing that through. Again, for example, like let's say during the week, your friends want to hang out on like a random Tuesday or Wednesday, but you know that after hours at work, there's something that you're trying to accomplish or a task that you want to do, or even like, let's say going to the gym in the morning. And so staying out past a certain time at night won't allow you to wake up and accomplish or achieve that goal of going to the gym 4 times a week. Something so small and realistic, because that's literally my life, but something so small and realistic that you don't realize can put you, I don't want to say behind, but just can like put you behind you getting ahead of, if that makes any sense. But something that could stop you from getting ahead of your goal. It's important to just to say no to, or just identify those moments. And so saying no was probably something in the past that took me the longest to understand, because I was just used to just living life by my rules and by my, means and freedom. I think coming out of college, you're just so used to, like, you just don't have as much responsibility. And so you can get by doing the bare minimum. I'm gonna just be real. And once you get into the real world, that bare minimum is not going to serve you, because there's no one telling you what to do or what not to do. And at the end of the day, like, you set the precedent for how things are going to unfold. And so once I got used to saying no, like I got the hang of it, I think that it got easier. And I will say discipline can be extremely disruptive to our normalcy for sure. But it's fine, because if you're like me, settling for normal is no longer an option. And I'll say that again. Settling for normal is no longer an option. Because by no means am I saying that you shouldn't enjoy life and literally live under a rock. But again, like circumstances, understanding what works for you in this season and what doesn't. And I also think that it boils down to like how bad you want that thing. Taking control over your life or steering the ship of your life. It really just all comes back to how bad you want whatever that is. And so if you have a goal of saving for a new car, let's say, for example, you might not be able to attend every Sunday brunch or vacation with friends. But being proactive and getting ahead of it would mean budgeting a certain amount weekly to still enjoy your daily coffee or occasional dinner with friends, which will suffice in the meantime. And I think that that's important, because for me, discipline is all about checks and balances. I personally cannot live a life of like super strictness. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I have to do to get there, and I won't budge until I get to that point, because then I'm dramatic and depressed. And I know that that's terrible, but that's the truth. It's funny because Cam and I are we're not polar opposites. That's dramatic, but we're opposites. He's somebody that can like totally like cold turkey do whatever he needs to do to reach his goal. And it doesn't matter like what he has to cut out or what he has to do to get there. Like, he's laser beam focused. And I love that about him. But I also know that I'm not the same. Like, I have to have checks and balances. I have to feel like I'm still enjoying things. And I have to feel like, life is bringing me joy. And so the way that I think about it is like, how can I achieve goal A without putting a stop to every single thing that brings me joy? Again, I know it's dramatic, but it's how I cope. And then the last thing that I would say, or the last factor in what I feel like I have applied in my life almost daily at this point, is embracing conflict. There's discipline, there's saying no, and then there's embracing conflict. We talked about this a bit in the previous episode with Whitney, but it was really worth asking, how do you respond to conflict? Are you easily taking offense, or are you passively handling situations? To me, embracing conflict means to welcome difficult situations with open arms, and not necessarily immediately giving up or feeling frustrated, but identifying, what I'm able to overcome. And it's funny that we also talked a lot, and I swear, y'all, I have been thinking about this so much since last episode, but we talked about gaslighting yourself. And I had not realized that I do this often, okay? And last episode, it was Whitney that said, how did she say it? I think she said, if you're gaslighting yourself, then you're not advocating for yourself. And if you can't advocate for yourself, then how can you trust yourself? Y'all, I went crazy, okay? And I think it was more so because I realized that I have moments where I am not trusting myself. And in order to truly be in control or steer, your life in a particular direction, like that is self-trust. Making decisions is about trusting yourself. If you're constantly overthinking and you can't decide between going left versus going right, like that has to do with self-trust. And for me, I think what I feel most powerful about when it comes to embracing conflict is like, I am really in control of this situation. I am in control of how this unfolds. I am in control of how it all comes to life, it comes to fruition. And I could either, go route A and just completely mess all of this up, or B and, make a decision that is best suited for me and what I want the outcome to be. And so something else that I think is in direct alignment with this part of the conversation is around embracing conflict, is like truly knowing yourself. It's funny because it's said that we developed our most important personality traits by age 5. Age 5, y'all. And so this means that we're not only told who and what we need to be at a young age, but our foundation has been set for us with little to no influence by us. And so as we mature and become stronger in our identity, I think it's imperative that we learn to be loyal to our feelings and to our emotions. And so that's where that conversation of gaslighting truly comes in, because it's like, do you know yourself? Do you trust yourself enough to make decisions that you feel confident in order for you to feel confident in those decisions, you need to be able to know what that looks like. And I think it's crazy that our identity is built so soon, because at the young age of 5, that ain't got nothing to do with like the next, 60 plus years to come. And so I think a part of being loyal to your feelings and emotions is learning your values and who you are at your core, prioritizing, creating space for personal growth, just so that you can understand those things. And for me personally, when it came to embracing conflict in my life, it was really learning and understanding my core values, like what were the things that matter most to me. And in doing so, it also showed like what actually matters for you to feel the need to like react to or respond to. We won't say react because we are talking about the difference between reactive and proactive, but what is really worth your time when it comes to giving something a response. And so identifying those core values for me was really helpful, because it almost like changed the way that I looked at life, like changed the way in which I took certain things seriously. It changed the way in which I prioritized my time as well. And so I think that it's always all connected. And so when we talk about what is no longer serving you, creating better habits, being disciplined, saying no, embracing conflict, it's like these are all just things that ladder back up into just like creating the best version of yourself. All in all, I really just want you all to walk away from today's episode feeling encouraged and capable of taking control of your life. Like I said, it's never about complete control, but it's steering your life in the direction that at least you feel like, you're being intentional about where you're headed, and are just headed in a direction that you feel good about. Because at the end of the day, like I talked about this earlier, but freedom is what matters most to me, right? And so what do the steps to getting to freedom look like in my life? And what makes me feel most in control? What makes me feel most just like proud about what it is that I'm doing? And so it starts with the smallest habit or mindset shift, and just really committing to showing up for yourself daily and allowing your proof of progress to feel your own personal growth. So I really appreciate y'all for being here. I also just appreciate you for listening in to the Minor Detail podcast. It's been a long time coming. Like it really has. Even the brand, The Minor Detail, coming about so suddenly in a time in my life when I felt like I needed to make a shift. And it's so crazy, y'all, because full circle, I talked earlier at the beginning of this episode just about needing to make that transition, and just understanding like life doesn't need to happen to you reactively. Sorry. And you need to be more proactive about it. But even like the minor detail coming to me and everything that the brand stands for and all the content creation work that I'm doing, and just really wanting to get things off the ground, this is not new. It really is not. This is like 5+ years in the making, if I'm being completely honest. And I know that one day I will look back and I will reflect and I'll remember that these were the things you did to get you to where you are now. And there is just nothing sweeter than that. I'm sorry. You just can't top it. Like, there's nothing in the world that feels better than that. And I also find it interesting because I came across this post on social yesterday that said we oftentimes look at balance as like juggling the multiple things we have going on, whereas balance is just more about like a never-ending flow. Like thinking about life in a sense of how do we make everything that's happening around us, or everything that I have going on, how do I make it just like flow evenly throughout one another, as opposed to just having to have this one sector of my life, compartmentalized and buttoned up, and this next thing super balanced and happening during these days of the week. But how does it just like all flow together? And ever since I saw that, I just thought it was like groundbreaking, because I'm someone who like feels like they need to compartmentalize. I'm someone that feels like everything needs to be in order. But I think that we just give ourselves a bit more like mental freedom and flexibility when we take that approach, where it's just all one, it just flows like water. It's just one even flow. And I think that a lot of times that is what steering looks like. Everything flowing together and just happening for your own good. And I was going to say your good, but really Romans 8:28 says everything is coming together for the good of those that love the Lord. And yeah, that moment just brought me back to the flow. All right, y'all. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for tuning into season 1 of the Minor Detail Podcast. Be sure to follow and share the show with a friend. I've loved growing this podcast and community with y'all, and I'm just so excited to continue this journey with all of you and continue to bring meaningful conversation to the forefront, which I like to call my little slice of the internet. Until next episode, I will see y'all very, very soon. Bye for now.